Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Fair Housing Insiders episode number 29. Yes, I said it, number 29. We are so grateful to our community who continues to support us in this complimentary fair housing education that we provide. Today, we're going to be talking about fair housing and local laws, local and state laws. Why is it so important to be paying attention to those, and how do you keep up to date with them? What should you do with them? So Michael Coughlin, Vice President of the Fair Housing Institute. Michael, welcome to the show. How are you?
Jonathan, glad to be here, doing well. Hope everybody else is too. I'm really excited to talk about this topic. We actually this is an incredibly important topic because it really applies to everybody differently, which is what makes it so confusing, is because depending on where you live, the content of this topic changes drastically. And as much as I'd love to get into every single local law, I don't think you guys want to watch a 70 or 8 hour video. But we even spent some time on our basics course going into how major state laws and even some municipalities kind of can affect people in different places. And because we talk about it in there, you should get the idea that that's why it's so important, that obviously the laws that affect somebody in maybe Los Angeles, California, are going to be different from somebody in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Like, it's just going to be completely different. I'm really excited to take a look at some scenarios and kind of get into this topic.
Yeah. So sometimes we can get so hung up on, well, I know my protected classes. I've got those down pat, federally protected classes, and that's great. Very, very important, but we don't want to get caught with anything that's on a local level. So an appropriate topic and good reminders to table. If you haven't discussed it for a while, use this episode as a basis for your next training session. Talk about it. All right, what are our local laws? And, on a community level, on that local town level, on a state level, make sure all those things are covered. So let's look at a scenario. And here we are with a leasing agent and a resident having a dispute over who's going to pay for a reasonable modification. So let's take a look at the scene and we'll get your comments on it, Michael.
I don't think that's right. I thought the law said that you are responsible for paying. Actually, since we are a private market housing provider, it is the resident's responsibility to pay for the modification. This all sounds fishy to me. I'm calling my lawyer.
All right, so we've got a little bit of a disagreement, let's say, between the leasing agent and the resident. And the leasing agent saying that, hey, listen, we don't have to pay these reasonable modification costs because we're a private market housing provider. And you know what? They're absolutely right. Unless they are in the state of Massachusetts or in the city, in New York City. In those cases, it is the housing provider's responsibility to pay for those costs. So just from where we are, you could literally live a few miles outside of the city. You could live just outside over the state line of Massachusetts, and the law is 100% different here. That statement suddenly becoming from just like, oh, that's correct, and then you go over a state and all of a sudden it's actually a fair housing violation. So you've got a real big problem here. It's important to stay on top of these laws. Another example, some of these are isolated, so it's really important that you stay up to date with them. We'll go over a few real quick. For instance, in the Madison, Wisconsin, and Austin, Texas, the status of being a student is a protected category. So that means that, maybe in Topeka, Kansas, they could actually discriminate against students and say, we don't want students living in here. And that would be perfectly acceptable. But if they did that in Austin, even if it was the same management company, just a different apartment complex, different housing unit, they said, oh, no, I'm sorry, we don't accept students. Well, guess what? That's a fair housing violation. Some of the more common ones you're going to see are sources of income. That's the one that comes up a lot. A lot of different states and localities do protect source of income, and that applies mostly to where we have Section 8 vouchers paying for housing. And of course, if you're in a locality that does protect source of income as a protected category, and you saying you don't accept Section 8 vouchers, get ready for a complaint and investigation, because that one is pretty cut and dry. It comes up again and again and again. Another one that comes up is veterans protections. Veteran status is a protected category, again, in a lot of states and a lot of localities, maybe or maybe not yours. But that obviously is going to protect veterans from getting discriminated against housing because they get deployed a lot. Mm-hmm. And obviously payments from overseas and managing finances and residency can be complicated, but that's why they need those protections, is because otherwise people could discriminate against them. And it's important to remember that in some of these instances we're talking about, it's not just fair housing laws that protect them. There are also landlord-tenant laws that protect veterans in certain circumstances, again, depending on the state and locality. So you really need to stay on top of all of these laws, and you need to stay updated because they can change a lot. At any, city council meeting, they could change those laws. At, the meeting your state legislature, they could change those laws. It could happen. Nothing could happen this year, and then the next year you could get a bunch of changes. So stay on top of all of those things.
Yeah, excellent examples. And like you said, that's just, I think you quoted about a half a dozen or so there, and the list goes on and on and on across the country where there's local and state laws that have to be paid attention to. So Michael, another question for you. How do state laws affect housing providers on a long-term or a national scale? What do you think about that?
I am very glad you brought that up. It's a little bit of a complicated area, but let's use a very recent example. Criminal history screening. It's a very hot topic throughout fair housing. And throughout state-specific laws, you have a lot of things called fair chance ordinances. Now let's kind of go over the differences between those. The general fair housing concept of criminal history screening is that, you can't have these blanket, we don't allow anybody with any kind of record into our housing units. Mm-hmm. The state and local ordinances give very specific direction as to what that means. How far can I look back when I'm doing criminal history screening? What kind of felonies can I look for? Does an arrest count, or do I need a felony conviction? There's a lot of specifics here, and obviously every place is different, but the important thing is that you need to know that. Your company needs to understand the difference. If you use a third-party screening company, they need to understand the difference. So there's a lot to take in here. But the point is that over time, long term, if you're looking at the picture of your company, we've seen a lot of things that started out as local and state laws that started to get more and more recognized, gain a lot of traction. Eventually, they became national and federal laws. We've recently talked about the recognition of sexual orientation and gender identity being protected under the category of sex. Started out as state and local, and now it is nationally accepted. So just because something doesn't affect you today doesn't mean that it won't in a year or 2 years or maybe even 10. And the point is that you have to have something set up in operations. So if you manage a very large apartment company, management company, you have places, units in Texas and California and Florida, New York, who knows? You need to understand that what may apply for criminal history screening in one place does not fly and is even illegal in a different one. So it's so important to understand how this is going to affect you and to be ready, even if it doesn't yet, because it may next year. So these are all things that you really want to think about. And I know I've bogged you down with a lot of confusing categories and saying, oh, this is a lot of responsibility. But guess what? There are some that actually do benefit housing owners and providers as well. For instance, in Indiana, well, there is now a law that makes it a misdemeanor to misrepresent your need for an emotional support animal, or for your verifier to misrepresent that need. So these are things that actually protect housing providers from people abusing those laws meant to help them. So there's a lot out there to understand and know, and it's really beneficial for you and your company if you understand it.
Yeah, very good. And we appreciate so much your insight on this, Michael. And we appreciate our housing associations and some of the education they provide us, our apartment associations, and everybody is there to play a role. And thank you for highlighting the one in Indiana. I'm sure they're very happy about that because that is a common challenge and complaint across the housing industry, is people misusing emotional support animals. So big topic. So thank you for highlighting all of that for us. So this will wrap up episode 29. Very important topic, local and state laws and why you need to pay attention to them, keep up to date with them. Thank you for being here today. Be sure to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and share this episode with your team for educational purposes. Until next time, well, thank you very much, and we will see you on our next show. Take care, everyone.
Do your research, people, and good luck.